What if the life you've been living was never really yours to begin with? Not in a dramatic way, not because something catastrophic happened to you, but because somewhere along the line, gradually, quietly, almost imperceptibly, you started making decisions based on what the world expected of you, rather than what your soul was asking of you. You started editing yourself before you even spoke. You started choosing paths not because they lit something up inside you, but because they felt safe or approved of, or at least defensible. And now, years later, you wake up some mornings with a feeling you can't quite name. Not misery, not crisis, just a quiet, persistent sense that something is off. Like a song playing slightly out of tune, like you're speaking lines that were written for someone else. If that feeling is familiar, if that description landed somewhere real in you, then this video is for you. Because what you're feeling isn't a flaw, it isn't weakness, it isn't ingratitude. It is one of the most important signals your inner life can send you. It is the sound of your deepest self knocking on the door of your awareness, asking to be let back in. We live in a time of extraordinary access to information. More content, more advice, more perspectives than any human being in history has ever had to navigate. And yet, by almost every meaningful measure, wisdom has never felt so scarce. The average person has more tools for self-optimization than ever before, and less genuine contact with their own inner life than at any point in recorded history. We've become fluent in other people's opinions about who we should be, and almost illiterate in our own native language, the language of the self. We make our most important decisions not from the deep, quiet place inside us that actually knows, but from the noise, from other people's expectations, from social pressure, from fear of judgment, from a constant, exhausting effort to be the version of ourselves that will be accepted, validated, and approved of. And the cost of that? It shows up not in one dramatic moment of collapse, but in the slow accumulation of choices that moved you further and further from your own center. In the fatigue that isn't physical, in the restlessness that no achievement quite dissolves, in the question that appears in quiet moments, the one you quickly push away before it can get too loud. Is this really my life? The answer to that question, the real answer, the one that changes everything, doesn't live outside of you. It never has. It lives in a place that every major tradition in human history has pointed toward, that Carl Jung spent his entire career mapping, and that you have been carrying inside you since the day you were born. We call it the higher self. And by the end of this video, you won't just have a theory about what it is, you'll understand how it speaks to you, what in you works to silence it, and what becomes possible in your life when you finally learn to let it lead. Stay with me. This is the most important conversation you can have, and you're having it with yourself. Before we go any further, let's be clear about one thing. The concept of the higher self is not a trend. It is not a modern invention. It is not a wellness industry slogan dressed up in ancient language. It is one of the oldest, most consistent, most widely attested ideas in the entire history of human thought. A thread that runs through civilizations separated by centuries and oceans, each arriving independently at the same essential recognition. Let's trace that thread together. We begin in ancient Greece, where Western philosophy took its first breath. Plato spoke of a world of ideal forms, a perfect, eternal, unchanging realm that exists beyond the physical world we can see and touch. In this framework, everything that exists in our world is a shadow of a more perfect original. Not just objects, people too. There is, Plato believed, an ideal form of you, a complete, fully realized, architecturally perfect version of the human being you are. Your higher self, in Platonic terms, is that original blueprint. It is your soul's design before time and experience began adding their compromises and alterations. Move forward to the Stoics, to philosophers and emperors like Marcus Aurelius, who wrote some of the most psychologically penetrating reflections on the inner life that Western civilization has ever produced. The Stoics spoke of the daimon, a personal divine intelligence residing within each human being. Not a demon in any negative sense, but exactly the opposite, an inner sacred flame, the source of reason, virtue, and authentic guidance. The Stoics believed that a life well lived was not a life of external conquest, but a life of continuous alignment with this inner guide. No matter what the external world was doing, and Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire in perpetual crisis, they believed the path to genuine peace lay not in controlling circumstances, but in returning again and again to that still, intelligent center within. Now let's travel east. For thousands of years, the sacred texts of India have spoken of the Atman, the individual soul, the immortal and divine essence at the core of every person. But the teaching goes deeper. The Atman, the ancient sages said, is not separate from the universe. It is a drop of the ocean, individual, particular, uniquely itself, and at the same time made of the same substance as everything else. Your higher self, in this understanding, is your direct and living connection to that universal consciousness, a thread of the infinite woven into the temporary fabric of your one human life. Different languages, different continents, different eras, but the same recognition that inside every human being lives something ancient, something knowing, something that cannot be manufactured or destroyed, something that is, in the deepest sense, already whole. And then came the 20th century and Carl Jung. Jung was not a mystic in the traditional sense. He was a rigorous scientist, a meticulous clinician who believed that the inner life deserved the same serious investigative attention as any other area of human experience. He spent decades working with patients, studying his own dreams and inner processes with the same discipline he brought to his clinical work, developing a map of the human psyche that remains, more than half a century after his death, the most comprehensive attempt to chart that territory ever made. What Jung discovered at the center of that map changed everything. He found that at the deepest layer of the human psyche, beneath the personal ego, beneath the personal unconscious, in the vast shared reservoir he called the collective unconscious, there was a central organizing principle. Not chaos, not a random collection of drives and memories and impulses. A center, an archetype of wholeness around which everything else in the psyche orients itself. He called it the self, not the ego, the self. And the distinction is everything. The ego is the part of our mind we identify with in ordinary waking life. It is our name, our story, our preferences, our fears, our plans. It is the narrator of our personal experience, the voice that says, I want this, I believe that, I am afraid of the other thing. The ego is real and it is necessary. But it is limited. It is a flashlight, not the sun. It operates from a narrow angle of vision, and it makes decisions primarily based on its own survival, approval, and comfort. The self, by contrast, is the entire psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective. It holds within it not just your individual experience, but the accumulated wisdom of humanity across all of recorded time. It contains the ego the way the ocean contains a wave, fully, effortlessly, without resistance. And it has a perspective that the ego, by its very nature, cannot access, the view from wholeness. Jung spent his career tracing the ways the self communicates with the ego, the ways the larger intelligence within us attempts to guide the smaller, louder, more defensive part toward a life that is more fully realized. He called the process by which a person gradually brings their ego into genuine relationship with their self, individuation, not perfection, not enlightenment in some otherworldly sense, but the slow, honest, courageous process of becoming, as completely as possible, who you actually are. This is what we mean when we talk about the higher self on this channel. Not a fantasy, not a spiritual bypass, not a promise that your problems will dissolve or your life will become effortless. A real, ancient, psychologically substantiated intelligence that has been inside you your entire life, waiting patiently for you to quiet down enough to listen. Here at Jung Philosophy, our purpose is exactly this: to help you reconnect with that intelligence, to take the profound legacy of Carl Jung and the deep traditions that preceded him and bring them into contact with the daily reality of your actual life, your decisions, your relationships, your fears, your unlived potential. If this work speaks to something in you, subscribe to Jung Philosophy right now and share this video with someone you know who needs to hear it. The people who find this channel almost always arrive at exactly the right moment, and there's someone in your life who might be at that moment today, now. The question that matters most: how does the higher self actually communicate with you? Because if this intelligence is real, if it's been present in you all along, then why does it so often feel impossible to hear? Why do so many of us spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, moving in directions that our deepest selves never sanctioned? The answer is both simple and difficult. The higher self does not communicate through noise. It does not argue, demand, or compete for your attention. Its native language is the language of depth, of subtlety, of symbol, of the body's quiet knowing. And in a world built to be as loud, fast, and relentlessly stimulating as possible, learning to hear that language is one of the most radical and necessary things you can do. The first and most immediate channel through which the higher self speaks is intuition. Every person alive has experienced this, though most of us have learned to discount it. A knowing that arrives fully formed, without logical steps, without evidence, without a clear, rational pathway. You're considering a significant decision, and despite every surface-level indicator suggesting it's the right move, something pulls back. There's a subtle tightening, a resistance that doesn't originate in analysis, but seems to arise from somewhere deeper. Or the opposite. You encounter a person, a place, an opportunity, and something in you opens with a certainty that precedes any logical justification. That is not irrationality. That is not anxiety looking for an excuse. That is a form of intelligence operating through a different processing system than linear thought. The ego evaluates sequentially, step by step, pros and cons, cause and effect. The higher self evaluates holistically, through feeling, through the body, through a kind of instantaneous synthesis that has already integrated more variables than conscious analysis could ever account for. Intuition is the higher self's most direct and immediate voice, and the more you practice honoring it in small things, the more legible it becomes in large ones. The second channel is what Carl Jung identified as one of his most significant discoveries: synchronicity. Meaningful coincidences that exceed the bounds of ordinary probability. You've been wrestling with a particular question for weeks, and a sentence in a book you picked up by accident provides exactly the perspective you needed. You're at a crossroads in your life, and you reconnect out of nowhere with someone who opens a door you didn't know existed. An idea you've been circling finds its expression in something a stranger says on the street. These moments feel charged. They feel significant, because they are. Jung's theory of synchronicity suggests that the inner world and the outer world are not as rigidly divided as our ordinary experience implies. There is a deeper order, what he sometimes called the unus mundus, in which inner meaning and outer events can correspond in ways that transcend ordinary causality. Your higher self uses synchronicities as navigational markers, as confirmation that you are moving in a meaningful direction, as evidence that your inner life and your outer circumstances are in communication. Begin to track these moments. Write them down, not obsessively, but attentively. As you do, something shifts in your relationship to daily life. It stops looking like a random sequence of events and starts revealing itself as something more like a conversation. If something about this is resonating with you right now, if this video itself feels like one of those synchronicities, write this in the comments. I am exactly where I am meant to be. Because sometimes the most important thing you can do is give voice to what you already know. The third channel is dreams. When the conscious mind quiets, night, When the ego finally loosens its grip on perception, the door to the unconscious opens. And what comes through is not random electrical noise. It is the most direct, most unfiltered form of communication that the higher self has available to it. Jung spent decades developing a rigorous approach to dream interpretation. Not one that imposed fixed meanings onto symbols, but one that listened to what each image meant within the unique context of each person's inner life. The figure chasing you through a dream may represent the aspect of yourself you've been avoiding. The vast house with unexplored rooms may be the territory of your own psyche you haven't yet entered. Water almost always speaks to the unconscious itself, its depths, its currents, its power to overwhelm or sustain. Dreams are not entertainment. They are dispatches from the deepest part of your own mind, written in the symbolic language consciousness has been using since long before humans had words. Learning to receive them, to sit with them, to let their images speak rather than explaining them away, is one of the most grounding and transformative practices available on this path. And the fourth channel is the one we are perhaps most systematically trained to ignore: the body. Your body is not simply a vehicle for your mind. It is one of the primary instruments through which your higher self registers information and communicates guidance. The chest tightening before a decision that violates your values. The particular quality of fatigue that comes not from physical exertion, but from living in a way that isn't aligned with who you are. The knot in the stomach that appears when you're about to agree to something your soul wants to refuse. These are not symptoms to be managed. They are messages to be decoded. And equally, the effortless energy that rises when you're engaged with work that genuinely matters to you. The quality of ease in the presence of certain people, not comfort in the sense of absence of challenge, but a deep, cellular sense of rightness. The full breath that comes when you finally make the decision you've been postponing. Your body has never once lied to you. Learning to consult it, to treat its signals with the same seriousness as rational analysis, gives you access to guidance that is both ancient and exquisitely precise. To make these channels more available, the practices are simpler than you'd expect. A few minutes of genuine silence each day, not background noise silence, but chosen stillness. Time in nature which dissolves the static of modern life and returns you to your own frequency. A journal kept not as a record of events, but as a conversation with the deeper self, particularly for dreams, synchronicities, and those moments when something inside you spoke and you felt it before you understood it. These are not productivity techniques. They are practices of attention, and attention, consistently directed inward, is how the signal grows stronger. But there is a complication. There is always a complication. Because even when the higher self is speaking clearly, even when the signal is undeniable, something inside you works with considerable force to make sure you don't follow it. Its name is the ego. And understanding it, not as a villain to be defeated, but as something far more complex and ultimately more sympathetic than that, is the key to everything that follows. Imagine two figures standing at the helm of a ship at sea. The first is a seasoned navigator. She has crossed every ocean. She reads the stars, the currents, and the subtle shifts in the weather with the kind of effortless accuracy that only comes from a lifetime of attentive practice. She is calm. She is not in a hurry. She holds the full map of the voyage in her awareness, and she knows, not through calculation alone, but through something deeper, precisely where this ship is meant to go. This is your higher self. The second figure grew up below deck, far from any horizon. Everything he has ever learned about the sea, he learned from storms, from moments of crisis, from the particular and traumatic education of pure survival. He is not a bad person. He is not your enemy. But he is operating entirely from the logic of fear, from a hard-wired, relentless drive to reach the nearest shore and anchor there, permanently, away from all uncertainty, all exposure, all risk. He is loud. He is urgent. He is absolutely convinced that what he is doing is keeping you safe. This is your ego. For most of us, for most of our lives, it is the figure below deck who has been steering the ship. Let's be precise about what the ego is and why it deserves compassion rather than contempt. The ego is a survival mechanism. It was designed, brilliantly, necessarily, with the full ingenuity of evolutionary wisdom, to protect you, to help you navigate complex social dynamics, to alert you to genuine danger, to construct a stable identity that allows you to function in a world that contains real threats. When you were a child, the ego was your indispensable ally. It protected you from physical danger and social exclusion. It learned what was safe and what wasn't, who to trust and who to be careful around, what kinds of behavior led to love and what kinds led to withdrawal. It was performing exactly the function it was designed to perform, and it performed it well. But as you grew into adulthood, something shifted. The protective mechanism began to generalize, applying its fear-based logic not only to genuine threats, but to imagined ones, to the existential risks of growth, change, vulnerability, and uncertainty. It began treating the discomfort of expanding beyond your current limits as if it were the same kind of danger as the threats it was originally designed to handle. When your higher self quietly signals, the work you're doing isn't aligned with who you actually are, the ego responds immediately. But what about the income? What about what people will think? What if you try something different and fail? What if you end up worse off than you are now? When the higher self says, "This relationship has reached the limits of what it can offer you both," the ego counters, "But what about the history you share? What if you can't do better? The pain you know is at least predictable. The pain you don't know could be anything." When an opportunity opens that would require you to step outside the boundaries of your established identity, the ego slams the door and calls it foolishness. This resistance is not a character flaw. It is a design feature that has outlived its original context. and seeing it clearly, naming it for exactly what it is one of the most significant acts of self-knowledge available to you. The ego's tools are numerous and sophisticated. It weaponizes your past, replaying old wounds and failures as predictive evidence about your future. It generates worst-case scenarios and presents them not as possibilities, but as inevitabilities. It borrows the voices of others, parents, peers, critics, and makes them sound like your own considered judgment. It sanctifies your comfort zone, disguising the fear of change as the wisdom of contentment. But Jung's answer was not to go to war with the ego. You cannot defeat a part of yourself by attacking it. That struggle only gives it more power, more urgency, more justification for its fear. Jung's answer was integration, the slow, patient, compassionate work of individuation, of bringing the ego into conscious, collaborative relationship with the self. Not elimination, not suppression, transformation. Think of the ego as a soldier who has been fighting without a commanding officer. He is brave. He has survived things that would have broken someone else. He deserves genuine respect for that. But he has been fighting the wrong battles, in the wrong terrain, according to a map drawn decades ago. He needs not to be destroyed, but to be given context, to learn that there is a commanding officer, that the officer sees the full landscape, and that the soldier's energy and courage are needed and valued, just no longer in the role of sole decision-maker. The inner conversation that makes this possible sounds something like this, spoken quietly and with genuine warmth. I hear you. I understand why you're afraid. I recognize what you've been trying to protect me from, and I'm grateful for it. But the decisions from here will be made from a deeper place. You're still with me, but the navigation is no longer yours to carry alone. Write this in the comments if it lands for you. I trust the wisdom that is already within me. Say it as many times as you need to, because the act of saying it, of claiming that trust out loud, is itself a beginning. That internal shift, the moment when the ego steps back even, fractionally, from its position of total control, is one of the most significant turning points a life can contain. Because when it happens, something remarkable begins to unfold. Life begins to flow. Not in the sense of becoming problem-free. Challenges remain, loss remains. The full range of human experience, including its most difficult passages, remains. But the relationship to all of it changes at a fundamental level. When you are living from your higher self, difficulties are no longer experienced primarily as assaults on your identity or evidence of your inadequacy. They become teachers. They become the specific forms of pressure required to develop the specific capacities your life is asking you to build. The question you bring to a crisis shifts from, "Why is this happening to me?" to, "What is this asking me to become?" And that shift, subtle as it sounds, changes everything about how you move through the experience. Decisions arrive with greater clarity, not because the rational analysis becomes easier, but because you have access to a richer and more integrated form of knowing, one that brings together intuition, body wisdom, feeling, and thought into a coherent signal rather than the exhausting cacophony of competing voices that the ego alone produces. Relationships undergo a deep transformation. When your sense of self no longer depends on external validation, when you are grounded in your own center rather than in other people's responses to you, the quality of your connections changes at its root. You stop approaching people primarily from a place of need or fear, which, paradoxically, makes you more genuinely present, more truly open, more magnetically available to authentic connection than you have ever been. The people whose presence genuinely nourishes you draw closer. The relationships held together primarily by mutual incompleteness begin, naturally and without drama, to release. Not because you've become cold, but because you've become whole enough that you no longer need them to fill a gap that was never theirs to fill. And perhaps most profoundly, your relationship with fear begins to shift. Fear doesn't disappear. It shouldn't. Fear, appropriately calibrated, is information, the psyche's early warning system. But when you are living from your higher self, fear changes its place in your inner hierarchy. It moves from the steering wheel to the passenger seat. It can speak, it can alert you, but it no longer decides. What begins to decide instead feels, at first, almost unfamiliar. Curiosity, openness, a growing capacity to meet the unknown not with dread, but with genuine interest, even, eventually, with something approaching eagerness. Because you begin to trust, not blindly, but from experience, that wherever your inner compass points, something meaningful awaits. That even the difficult passages contain their own intelligence, their own gifts, their own contributions to who you are becoming. This is individuation. Not a destination, but a way of moving through life. A continuous, deepening orientation toward your own authentic center. A daily practice of listening to what is most real in you and allowing it, with increasing trust and decreasing resistance, to guide what you do and how you do it. Here at Jung Philosophy, this is the work we are doing together. Not simply accumulating knowledge about Carl Jung or ancient philosophy, though we take genuine pleasure in both. The real work is using these ideas as instruments for self-recognition, holding them up like a lens against your own life and asking honestly, where am I living from the ego's fear and calling it reason? Where am I ignoring the higher self's signal because following it would require change that feels dangerous? Where have I been reciting someone else's lines so long that I've forgotten I have my own voice? We cannot give you the answers. No channel can. No video, no philosophy, no teacher can tell you who you are. What we can do is help you remember that you already know. That the compass you've been searching for was never lost. That the story you were meant to live has not been written without you. It has been waiting for you to pick up the pen. And as this particular conversation draws to a close, I want to leave you not with a concept, but with an invitation. Not a technique, not a framework, not a list of steps. A single, honest act. Tonight. Not someday, Not when things slow down. Find 5 minutes of actual silence. Put the phone down, sit somewhere still, and in that silence ask yourself one question. What do I already know that I've been pretending not to know? Don't force an answer. Don't analyze what comes. Just ask. And then stay quiet enough to let the faintest response begin to form. The way a sound becomes audible when you finally stop speaking. Your higher self has been answering that question your entire life. Every intuition you dismissed, every synchronicity you explained away, every bodily signal you overrode, every quiet moment of knowing that you quickly buried under the next item on the to-do list. It has been answering, patiently, without resentment, without urgency, in the steady and unhurried way that deep things always speak. The only variable, the only thing that has ever been in question, is whether you were still enough, open enough, willing enough to hear it. You came here today. You stayed through all of this. Something in you brought you here, and that wasn't an accident. The compass is yours. It has always been yours. The captain's chair is yours. The story is yours. Now write it.